We want to thank you all for coming. This is a terrific turnout. It really does show the high level of concern and interest across the state about the impact of large agricultural operations on the environment and on communities. We've got, and on the other states, there's some people here from Illinois. We've got a very diverse audience here. We've got activists, we've got neighbors, we've got concerned citizens, we've got staff from DNR and from the Department of Agriculture and Trade and Consumer Protection. We also have a lot of people here from the dairy industry. We've got people from the Dairy Business Association. We've got a number of farmers, business people here who own large operations. We know of at least 25 of them are here, and there's probably more. We appreciate that you're here as well. We thank you for coming. We're glad to have you, and we hope that you listen to our perspective with open minds. Let me try and set the stage today for this conference. And I don't want to try and sugarcoat it. We're not objective. We have a very specific point of view. We believe that livestock operations, large livestock operations, and the laws associated with them in Wisconsin, they greatly concern us. We think they're bad for Wisconsin, and we think they're bad for the environment. We have several objectives today. The first one is to protect the environment and public health. If companies want to raise cows or hogs or turkeys in huge complexes, that's fine. Most of the people we have talked to don't object to that at all. Let me be very clear. Nobody here is anti-agriculture. We recognize its importance to the economy in Wisconsin, its importance to our dining tables, and our importance to the world. What we are is anti-pollution. What we object to is that large operations externalize their costs of doing business. They very often pollute the air and the water. These are not costs that the rest of the community should have to pay to prevent or to clean up. This is not a problem limited to large operations or even to CAFOs that have permits. Smaller operations cause a great deal of environmental degradation, and in fact we'll hear today that probably most of that degradation comes from smaller operations. Industry will tell us that they're just following the law, doing what the law permits. I find that excuse hollow. Let's be honest, they wrote the laws. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars every year to influence the legislature and the administration. The laws are weak. They don't protect communities, they don't protect air, and they don't protect water. They don't protect neighbors. The authorities and resources for enforcement are nowhere near the levels that are needed. For example, DATCAMP's own recent review found that only 5 of 19 nutrient management plans were adequate. This is thanks to the research of the River Alliance of Wisconsin. What about the other 14? Who's minding the store? Here's one of the lobbyists' favorite tools. In the name of regulatory reform, promoting business, industry goes to the legislature and gets statutes and rules adopted that impose severe time limitations on the agencies for reviewing plans and permit applications. They get laws in place that provide for automatic permits if the applications are not reviewed within the time limits. Then they get the legislature and the administration to cut the funding and the staffing, reducing the ability of the agency to properly review the applications. Presto, automatic permits. It's the lobbyists' legislature, not the people's legislature. The legislature is to a large extent a wholly owned subsidiary of big business. There are literally hundreds of dedicated and talented staff at DNR. But as long as industry continues to fight things like the efforts to reinstate the Natural Resource Board appointment of the DNR secretary and politics trumps science, those good staff cannot do the job they want to do protecting the environment. The law says that the permit threshold generally is 1,000 animal units. That's 700 dairy cows or 55,000 turkeys. You need a pollution discharge permit if you have more than those 1,000 animal units. What that means is that an operation with only 690 cows or only 54,000 turkeys is largely free of much regulation. You can't tell me that there's a significant difference in terms of the potential to pollute the air and the water between 54,000 turkeys and 55,000 turkeys. Who are they kidding? And who's counting? 54,998, 54,999, 55,000. Oops, I've got one too many. I better eat one so I don't need a permit. I'm sorry, but until we see some independent ground truthing and verification, there's no basis in my mind to trust self-reporting and self-monitoring. A permit is required for a CAFO that has between 300 and 999 animal units only if it has already caused water contamination to navigable waters. Who's checking? It's already too late. Talk about closing the barn door after the cow has gotten out. And if it's groundwater, no problem. Don't need a permit. There are generally 4 models or standards for how a government can regulate activity. The first and the lowest standard is that the regulated activity is permitted regardless of how or what you pollute. I suspect Jim Hightower would agree with us that that's the Texas model. Second, the next higher level, the activity is permitted if you only pollute in the ways that the state says you can. This is the Wisconsin model. In Wisconsin, the law doesn't say you can't pollute. It says you can't pollute unless you have a permit to do so. The next higher level is that the activity is permitted if there's no environmental impact. And the fourth idealistic level would be that the activity would be permitted if there were a net environmental benefit. We can aspire, I think, to a higher standard. Here's my point. It's wrong to pollute. Ethically, morally wrong, regardless of whether or not it is legally wrong. The waters and air of Wisconsin belong to all the people, and in Illinois. Nobody has a right to pollute them. Industry has no moral right to impose their costs on their neighbors, driving down property values and the quality of life with sickening odors, poisonous air, and bad wells. They should not have a legal right to do so either. I know this is almost a foreign concept, especially for a lawyer. Regardless of whether the law permits it, environmental pollution is wrong. It's just dead flat wrong. If nitrate concentrations in the nearby stream are too high, of course you can hire lawyers and throw up all kinds of reasons why it's not your problem. Or you can fix the problem. Why not fix it? Industry can do it right. They have the resources, they have the know-how. Let's force them to step up and do it right. It seems to me that all too often what industry wants in Wisconsin, and this is not just big agriculture, is an environment with no liability, no regulation, no accountability, and no taxes. Just trust us, they say. There's a reason why the business community, including agriculture, spent so much independent money in the last Supreme Court election. I say that industry needs to step up, be accountable, stop polluting, and act responsibly in the interest of the entire community and society, not just in their own business-motivated profit interests. Those are important. We all understand that they drive the economy, but they don't supersede the other things that are out there. They can do both, and if they do, I think they're going to be more successful, not less, because they will regain the trust and the partnership of their communities and the people who live around them. Our land, our water, our environment, our healthy economy are all part of our common wealth. We're in this together. So I welcome industry here today, because one of our hopes is that we can initiate some productive dialogue, not just fighting these things in town boards and courts and administrative proceedings and in the legislature. I hope that they understand some of our perspective and that we can find ways to address those issues. I hope industry will learn something today, just as some of us learned some things when we attended their conference, the Dairy Business Association, in this very building. Of course, the difference is they charged us $170, and our lunches were not as good. So we'll really ask you guys to dig deep when the bucket comes around and pay for your lunches. We hope this large showing will help bring our perspective to the table at the DNR and to DATCAP as well. The citizens expect the state agencies to protect Wisconsin's natural resources, not just business interests. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Our core institutions are in trouble. They're in deep trouble when the citizens believe that the process is corrupted and they lose faith in government to help protect their interests. I have no doubt that the vast majority of staff in the agencies are acting in their best talent, their best faith, in good faith with deep commitment, but we haven't given them the tools that they need to do the job. Finally, we hope this conference will continue to educate, to build public awareness. We want to help build the growing network of stakeholders across the state who are committed to bringing about changes that will ensure that the environment is protected while agriculture thrives. This is a continuation of a movement, not a beginning, and certainly not an end. Wisconsin's health is like a milking stool. I doubt that there's any farmers here today who still use milking stools. You all know them though. They have 3 legs, and if you cut one off, the thing collapses. In order to have a healthy Wisconsin and a healthy society, we need 3 things. We need strong community institutions, schools, independent local governments, nonprofit organizations, churches, all the rest. Second thing we need is a vital and thriving economy to have a healthy Wisconsin, including agriculture, without question. And the third thing we've got to have is a clean environment. When anyone is missing, Wisconsin is falling over like that broken stool. I think that these large operations, too often, are causing all three legs to tip. The legislature has imposed statewide siting criteria on three different kinds of facilities. One is power plants and transmission lines. I think everybody would agree that they produce a good, a benefit that we all need, but nobody wants to live near one. The second thing is landfills. Same thing. They provide a service that we all need, but again, nobody wants to live next to one. The third one does not fit the pattern. CAFOs. Nobody wants to live near one, and most would agree that they benefit only the owner, not the broader community. The siting law in Wisconsin usurps local authority for the benefit of a single landowner at the expense of others. Again, externalizing costs. That's just wrong. Jamie Saul has just moved to Wisconsin in the last few months. Already he's made a tremendous difference as an attorney on these kinds of issues. He's an outstanding new addition to the advocacy community in Wisconsin, and he's going to give us a summary of the siting law as our next presentation. Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I would like to, first of all, echo Peter's sentiment that we are just simply blown away with the turnout today. This is amazing. We started planning this conference maybe 3 months ago, and as of just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think we had 50 or 60 folks signed up. We've practically tripled that number in the past few weeks. I think there'll be more folks coming throughout the day, so thank you all so much for turning out and for your support on these important issues. My presentation today is going to be about Wisconsin's livestock siting law, and I'd like to start out by seeing a show of hands of those who've, in their communities, been a part of a siting battle under this new siting law. That's over half of the audience here. So this new law that we have in Wisconsin that dictates how livestock operations are sited really has become sort of ground zero for how communities are dealing with growing confined animal operations. So the livestock facility siting law is a statute that was enacted in 2004. Shortly thereafter, the Department of Agriculture, known as DATCAP, issued a siting rule. That was 2006. And for my presentation today, I'll be using the phrase siting law to mean both the law and the rule kind of rolled into one. Now, why should you care about this law? It's important if you're going to be facing expanding livestock operations in your community to have a basic understanding of how the law works. It will give you a voice in how and where new livestock operations will be located in your community. Your understanding will help you know how you can influence local siting decisions that directly affect your quality of life. This understanding of this law will help you become familiar with your right to challenge a local siting decision if you feel it was made inconsistent with the law. And finally, it will allow you to recognize that the law is heavily biased, as Peter mentioned, in favor of the rapid expansion of CAFOs in Wisconsin. Now, the stated purpose of the siting law is to provide for the uniform regulation of livestock facilities. Now, note what are not purposes of this law. Protect drinking water and surface water, guard against negative health impacts of hazardous air emissions, ensure a high quality of life for residents of rural Wisconsin. These are not the intention of the siting law. What does the siting law do? Well, it establishes uniform state standards that are to be used by local communities to make siting decisions for new or expanding livestock operations. It provides for an application and approval process that must be used by those local governments who choose to license such operations. And finally, it restricts the ability of local governments to direct the location of new livestock facilities through zoning or protective ordinances. What does the law not do? It does not give a local government any additional authority to manage the growth of livestock operations than it had before the law's existence. It does not require local governments to do anything if they choose not to pass a siting ordinance or to employ a conditional use permitting scheme. and it does not affect any other regulations that may apply, such as DNR's permitting processes. In DATCAP's own words, the siting law, or more specifically the rule, replaces local regulations that in some cases have made it nearly impossible to start or expand livestock operations. Predictability is certainly a good thing for agriculture, but this law simply takes it too far. Because also in DATCAP's words, a properly completed siting application essentially guarantees local approval of new operations. Local control over land use is completely gone under this law in terms of livestock operations. Now I'm going to go through how the siting law works in practice. First, the local government must enact a siting ordinance to gain access to even the minimum state standards that are found in the siting law. The siting law is not in and of itself a self-executing law. And I'm going to read here from the rule itself. The livestock facility siting law does not require local approval. But if local approval is required, the political subdivision must grant or deny approval based on the siting law. So if your town or county does not have a siting ordinance in place, the standards that are included in the law are of no value to you. Second, in most instances, the livestock operation must propose to have at least 500 animal units for the siting law to apply. An animal unit is as Peter mentioned, a determination that's calculated based on the weight of the animal. It's used to compare animals of different species. For instance, 500 animal units is approximately 350 milking cows, 1,250 pigs. So if the operation falls below that threshold, then again, the siting law does not apply. Third, for expanding operations only, the proposed expansion must be at least by 20%. Thus, an expansion from 500 to 550 animal units, which is roughly 350 to 365 cows, there's no local regulation allowed of that expansion. But if the expansion is from 500 to 650, roughly a jump from 350 to 455 dairy cows, then that's above the 20% threshold, and the local siting ordinance will be applied. Fourth, if there is a local ordinance and the planned facility is of the requisite size, the owner of the proposed facility must complete a DATCAP designed application that addresses each of 5 substantive standards that are found in the law itself. The local government at the county or town board level is not allowed to apply any additional requirements, nor are they allowed to modify the application itself. So what substantive standards are created by the siting law? Well, they fall into 5 categories addressing location of livestock structures, odor and air emissions, nutrient management, waste storage facilities, and runoff management. The first standard addresses the location of livestock structures, and it defines livestock structures to include any physical structure that is used to house or confine livestock or to store feed or manure. It permits a local government to require a minimum setback from property lines and public roads, but also sets a cap for those setbacks. And finally, this standard includes a specific and mandatory setback of 350 feet for manure storage structures, with a few exceptions built in as well. The second standard addresses odor and air emissions, and the way this standard works requires the calculation of an odor score by the applicant. The odor score is based primarily on the predicted odor from livestock structures, the separation distance from those structures to the nearest affected neighbor, and the various management practices that might be used at the facility to control odor. The odor standard does not apply, however, if all structures are at least 2,500 feet from the nearest neighbor, and if the facility is an expanding facility up to 1,000 animal units. So there's some cases where you simply don't have access to the odor requirements. The third standard addresses nutrient management, and this standard generally requires that the manure be managed and land applied consistent with technical guidelines that have been established by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The guidelines, in theory, dictate how, when, and where manure may be spread on land, the goal being to minimize nutrient entry into surface water and groundwater, and also to protect the physical, chemical, and biological condition of the soil. Note, though, that a complete nutrient management plan is not itself required by this siting law. The fourth out of the 5 standards addresses waste storage facilities. And the general standard is that all waste storage facilities must be built to minimize the risk of structural failure or the potential for discharge of waste to surface and groundwater. It's presumed to be true, however, if the facilities are built in accordance with certain USDA technical requirements for construction. And additionally, for open waste lagoons, excess storage capacity is required by the law. The fifth and final substantive standard of the law deals with runoff management, and the standard includes a variety of requirements that address issues such as the discharge of polluted runoff from feed storage facilities, the diversion of runoff from certain feedlots and waste storage facilities, and livestock access to surface water, etc. Now, moving on to the local review of siting applications. This is where it gets interesting, and this is where a lot of the controversy springs up in communities around the state. First of all, there is a presumption of compliance with the state standards so long as the application itself is properly completed. There's no independent review of the application or of the data included in it required by the law. The presumption may be rebutted by, quote, clear and convincing evidence that the standard has not been met. That sets a pretty high burden. So what if a county board has some evidence, some conflicting evidence perhaps, that shows that the state standard has not been met? That might not be enough to amount to clear and convincing evidence. And in those cases, the application will ordinarily be granted. The conclusion here is that the siting law essentially requires that the local government take the applicant's word that the standards have been met. And in most instances, local governments will be relying on that presumption as opposed to doing any factual or investigation of itself, because they're likely going to lack the resources to do so. Now, can a local government enact its own and more stringent siting standards? Yes, it can, but it's going to be quite difficult. Local standards more stringent than the state standards must be based on a reasonable and scientifically defensible findings of fact that clearly show that the standards are needed to protect public health and safety. Now, what does this mean? What about the standards that are merely intended to promote public health or safety? That might not be enough, because intended could not be interpreted or may not be interpreted as the same as needed. What about those standards that protect the public welfare or public quality of life? Those probably would not be allowed either under this law, because the law only addresses public health or safety. Conclusion here is that the siting law has set a very high bar for enacting local environmentally protective livestock siting ordinances. Can you still use zoning to control the location of livestock operations? Yes, you can, but again, this is going to be very difficult. In the first scenario, if the zoning ordinance involves a cap on the size of livestock operations, there must also be what I call a sacrifice zone that allows livestock operations of unlimited size. So if you're going to set a cap based on animal units, you also have to have another zone where livestock facilities are allowed of unlimited size. In the second scenario, if a zoning ordinance involves an outright prohibition on livestock operations, it must be based on, here's this phrase again, reasonable and scientifically defensible findings of fact that clearly show the prohibition is necessary to protect public health or safety. So if you're going to have a prohibition in one zone, it has to be based on clear findings of fact. So the conclusions that I'd like to draw are that, first of all, the siting law is bad for local government. It creates a highly complex regulatory scheme, but leaves implementation of it to towns and counties that often lack the resources or expertise needed to administer it. It also caps the fee that may be charged to review the siting application at $1,000. Now, granted, this is a lot of money, but is it enough to hire a crop consultant to review the nutrient management data? Is it enough to hire an engineer to independently review the facility designs? Is it enough to cover staff time for public meetings and other administration? In some cases, no, and I think it's likely that towns and counties will forego that independent review because they don't have the money for it. Finally, this law is bad for local government because it strips traditional local authority to govern how land is used through zoning or local ordinances. The siting law is also bad for communities that want sustainable agriculture. The presumption of compliance that's found in the state standards makes it difficult to engage in a thoughtful review of local siting applications. In most cases, the government will lack the resources to review the application thoroughly. The limitations placed on more restrictive local standards make it impossible to protect public welfare or the public quality of life. And finally, the restrictions placed on local zoning powers makes it challenging to protect highly valued natural resources in the community, such as pristine rivers and watersheds, local drinking water supplies, and prized wildlife habitat areas. The conclusion is that the livestock facility siting law has effectively paved the way for rapid expansion of increasingly large, confined livestock operations, stripped local governments of much of their traditional authority to control land use while burdening them with an incredibly complex and often contentious licensing process, and it makes it difficult for citizens to protect their communities from the risks of water and air pollution. But nonetheless, your community should have a siting ordinance in place because something is better than nothing. At the very least, you will have the 5 state standards that you can apply when they're triggered in those circumstances. What are the next steps that are needed to address this law? Well, we need to restore some local authority to take into account localized concerns, such as high-quality waterways, unique topography, etc. The law creates uniform state standards, but those aren't very meaningful because our land and our natural resources throughout the state are not uniform. We also need to increase the scientific understanding of the environmental and public health impacts of such operations so that local restrictions are scientifically sound and truly protective of public health and the environment. And finally, we need to return zoning power to local communities so that at least some areas can be maintained CAFO-free. Now, if you're looking for additional information, DATCAP does have a very comprehensive website that I would recommend that you peruse, and also feel free to contact me directly if you have any questions. I'll be happy to go through any of this in much more detail. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
My name is Russ Tooley. I'm from a group called Centerville Cares. We're primarily located in Cleveland, Wisconsin, which is right on Lake Michigan between Manitowoc and Sheboygan. I became involved in the CAFO issue about 2003, and it was because the neighboring CAFO, Maple Leaf Dairy, was going for a renewal of their permit. Their initial permit as a CAFO was in 1997. And when it came time for renewal, the neighbors were concerned because the problems that had been forecast, namely those...
Sorry, Russ, you might be without
slideshow. That's okay. I'm so... We can make it without, but keep trying. The issues that had been presented when the initial permit for Maple Leaf Dairy was issued were things like, we're concerned about fish kills because of the number of animals, we're concerned about the odor because of the concentrations of animals, and we're concerned because this dairy is like 1.5 miles from Lake Michigan and right between 2 streams. So when I was asked to talk to you today about lessons learned, these words came to mind. Now, I'm not going to talk about every one of these words, but each of these words brings to mind some of the lessons that we've learned. For instance, the top of the list here, of course, we have to have Midwest environmental advocates. We would be lost without you. And that is because my naivete at starting this process in the renewal of Maple Leaf's permit began sorry Gordon, at the DNR. I thought, well, the DNR will listen because we've had the fish kills, we've had the odor, we've got the runoff problems. Certainly, they're going to get involved. Our initial trip to the DNR here in Madison went like this. I asked a question related to the renewal of the permit, and the answer came back, when we renew this permit. Now, wait a minute. We haven't had public hearings. There hasn't been research done. What do you mean, when we renew this permit? Isn't it if we renew this permit? And the answer was, well, no, we haven't denied a permit in 20 or 30 years. Well, then why issue a permit if every permit is going to be renewed? So that's when we really knew MEA was going to be critical if we were going to have any success at making improvements in the local CAFO. The second reason that brought MEA really close to me is this personal experience where the CAFO has some really fancy, high-priced attorneys. They got an article written in the Milwaukee Journal that was written such that between the lines, the implication was that this local group around this magnificent dairy had somehow figured out how in the dark of night, in this 20-minute period where nobody was around, to pump thousands of gallons of manure out. So, the Green Bay television station, on a Sunday night, in the middle of winter, knocks on my door. And I'm out in the country. You don't get visitors in dark of night, especially Sunday night. I open the door, you get this microphone stuck in my face that says, "Did you do it?" Whoa. So, lessons to be learned include making sure that what you say is accurate and that you have good help. Second point on here is positive. If you're going to fight a CAFO, how do you talk about the bad things and remain positive? Because nobody likes to be around somebody that's always saying, ugh. So, what we've done is we've maintained our focus as a group on water quality issues and air quality. Always talk about, hey, we just want to be able to swim and fish in the water and breathe the air. And in our community, we've gotten grants so the local farmers can put buffers along their streams. We sponsored conferences at the local technical college in terms of explaining some of the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District issues so that those issues are brought to home. And one of the things we're proud of is that we learned in going around our town that we didn't have just CAFO issues and agriculture issues. We've got a lot of failing septics. And as a result of our work, the county was good enough to put through an ordinance that is really tough and I believe will correct some of the septic issues. So make sure you keep focused on water quality and air quality. Be positive. Monitors. You, if you're going to have one of these CAFOs in your community, you are going to become the monitor. Our legislature has unfortunately restricted funding for the DNR. They really aren't in a position to monitor. I always thought that was their job. But they don't have the people and the money to really do that. You got to do it. And monitoring is important. Just think of how fast cars would be going on our expressways if there wasn't the potential, at least, that around the corner was the trooper. You're the trooper. Make yourselves known. Because it's human nature to do a better job if the person that might want to take a shortcut thinks you're watching. Gordon went through pointing out a lot of the manure spill issues. Guess how those get found? It's not because the DNR is looking, it's because you're looking. And a lot of these happen way out in the boonies. So it's guys working on railroad tracks and they see something in the water that's not right. They report them. Or in the fall of the year, we got all these hunters out in the woods. They report them. That's what we're relying on. And because our legislature has seen fit to so restrict funding on the DNR, guess who has raised their hand to say, we'll do it? That would be our Dairy Business Association. Fundamentally, the DNR is outsourced through Green Tier the monitoring of CAFOs to the very organization that fought so hard to make sure in February and March, when it was mentioned, those are prime times, they fought all those regulations. 6 months of storage, they fought that. They're going to be the ones monitoring. So you better do your share. PETA. If you're going to be a group that's concerned about CAFOs in your community, don't let yourself get marginalized. I don't know how many times I've gone into a meeting and someone brings up PETA. They want to associate you with the extremes. Because if you're an extremist, it's easy to write you off. So make sure you focus on air and water and on real things. Persistence. Make sure you're in this for the long haul. It can pay off. This local CAFO that's near us, I believe that the phosphorus restrictions in there were put in there as a result of the fact that there was so much attention being paid to that particular dairy, because this was before the current phosphorus restrictions were really required. And that farm today is considering the installation of digester technology. Now, digester technology is very expensive and can help on some of the pathogens that were spoken of earlier today, and can make the management of large volumes of manure easier. Still requires good management, but at least they are in the right direction, and they had been refusing to make those kinds of investments in the past. So persistence is good. Vigilance. I've failed this one. One of our early successes in working with MEA was an agreement with the DNR and the legislature that we would drop some potential litigation against this local CAFO because of ammonia. In exchange for that, we were expecting to see regulation of ammonia from factory farms in 2007, 2008. But out of the blue, when the deadline came, whoops, we're not ready. You got to delay that for 4 years. Had I been vigilant and asking how this was coming along, perhaps we could have made it happen. Integrity. There's so many things to talk about. Never, never, never exaggerate. It's bad enough. You don't have to exaggerate. For example, one of our members saw a satellite photo of Lake Michigan at some of the streams that go off of Maple Leaf Dairy property. And it's a satellite photo showing a cloud shadow on the lake. One of my members, unfortunately, used our organization's name and sent out that photo saying, look at all the manure coming out of Maple Leaf Dairy. That spread like wildfire, and it made us look like absolute idiots. The person was trying to do a good thing. So make sure you don't let yourself get put in a spot where you got foolish things like that going on. And finally, community and agencies. Our local dairy agent works with us to get us FaceTime with farmers that we wouldn't otherwise be able to get, so we can understand really what's going on there. And our local soil and water department is working with us in trying to better understand how the nutrient management plans are really working, what works and what doesn't. And then I've also got on here apples, as in bad apples. It's really the bad apples in any industry, agriculture included, that cause all the trouble and cause the reason as to why we need all these regulations. Most of the people in my community, these farmers, they're reducing phosphorus in the animal diets, they're reducing spreading rates on the land, they're putting in the grass buffers. They don't get the credit. But the couple of bad actors who are really pushing the limits, those are the ones that need regulation. That's why we have regulation. So if we would go to the next slide here. And finally, when you get into fighting one of these, step back and enjoy what you're fighting for. If you like to fish, make sure you take time out to fish. Swimming, boating, hiking, hunting, make sure you continue to do those things. It's so easy to get all wrapped up and you spend all your time in this. So I want to go through a couple of pictures that tell 1,000 words, and then I'll shut up. Just so you know, Jamie actually gets out in the field and works. If I can make this thing here. This would be Jamie. This was last fall. We conned Jamie into coming out to go for a walk in one of our creeks to find drain tiles and find what was going on. Next. So this is the crew from MEA. We're about to go down in the creek. Next. We got everybody in the creek. Next. Here's Jamie following up the rear, making sure his crew doesn't fall in. Next. This is one of our members, and right here is one of those drain tiles off of a field. And I'll tell you about this field in another slide in a minute. And gee, here's a batch of cows. I don't know exactly where the fence is here. Next. There is a fence as we went further down, and we had this picture taken. We got some happy cows actually out on grass. Next. And here we're taking a sample for E. coli. We do our own E. coli testing. We can do this for about $2 a sample. Next. Every presentation's got to have Google Maps in it. So I want to talk about where we do water sampling and what we do. So we are about in this area here, if this is all Wisconsin here. Next. Focusing in, we talked about that town of Morrison problem. That would be up here with all those contaminated wells. And where we are is right over here. Next. The big lake over here, and then the really big mama lake over here. Next. So town of Cleveland, and our water sampling happens right around Maple Leaf Dairy here. Next. This again is Maple Leaf Dairy, Lake Michigan. This is about 1.5 miles. That creek walk that Jamie and the staff from MEA went on was right up in here. It was right up along here. Next. So as a part of what we're doing, we're going to spend this year about $30,000 or $40,000 in water sampling. And we've gotten better satellite photos. So this again is the new Maple Leaf. We were originally told this was just for heifers. We asked the DNR why are they having in their plans room for a milk house with heifers. Didn't get an answer, but now we know because there are cows there. So this is the new Maple Leaf Dairy. This is the old one. There are about 5,000 animal units there. And we're using a program called ArcGIS to understand the topography and understand the hydrology in our area. Next. With that previous satellite photo, you couldn't really get a sense as to what the topography was like. So this is a shuttle photo using radar, giving us depths. So let's go to the next photo. And we take that previous photo and put it over the top of the depths so you get a feeling for the flow of the land. Next. We also bought from the county plat information. So every one of these lines represents ownership. We know who owns that land. We know how many acres is there. And for fundraising, it's really cool because these people living along the lake, they really don't like the fact that there's too much phosphorus in the water and there's all this algae. So now I've got an excellent mailing list for fundraising. Next. From the DNR, we got the river information in the creeks, so we know where the creeks are. We know how they're relative to Maple Leaf Dairy. Next. This is road information put over the top of it. Next. This is a separating line. This is one watershed for Fisher Creek. This is a watershed for Point Creek. Next. This is the land owned by Maple Leaf Dairy. It's rather significant in these watersheds. Next. This field up here is that one that Jamie was pointing out the field tile coming out of. And that'll be one of the places where we do water sampling this year, in terms of seeing what comes out of these field tiles for nutrient. We will also be doing DNA tests, E. coli tests, phosphorus tests for the water, and we will look at baseline, we'll look at rain events, and we'll look at dry times, and we'll look when manure is spread. So that's our water sampling. Next. We have continuous monitors in the water for dissolved oxygen and conductivity. Next. This is one of those units. The best picture is coming up. But maybe I should just shut up. Are we going to be able to get that? If we can't get this really quick, I'll just shut up. Down more. Look at that go.
Getting there slowly.
Ah. Okay, well, what it would have been is this guy standing at a boat launch on Lake Michigan trying to launch a boat. And he's up to his, anyway, trying to shovel away the algae because you can't get to the lake because there's so much of this cladophora algae growing because it's been found that there's too much phosphorus in the water. And this is not an urban community. I can look for miles and not see a mowed lawn. This is just all agriculture leading the phosphorus into the lake. So part of the problem there in terms of why all this algae grows so fast is because there's too much runoff. So that's what we're doing. Those are some lessons from our group. Thank you.
What this book is about is a celebration of the plucky spirit of the American people. We hear too little about that. You know, we hear that America's a conservative country, that we're a cautious people, that we're a fearful people, that we march in lockstep to the corporate order. Well, horse hockey, that's not us at all. We're a bunch of mutts and mavericks. That's who built America, and that's who expanded America over the years and extended our democratic possibilities in this great, great country. Ordinary folks like you getting together in confabs like this to see if we can't take power back and extend that democracy even further. The people we write about in this book, and this is about just ordinary folks doing extraordinary things in business, in politics, in healthcare, in the banking, in the food economy, in religion, in so many different ways. The people we write about are not Rockefellers, they're not rich, they're not geniuses, they are not lucky, they're rebels. People who just looked at a situation and said there's got to be a better way to do it than this. In other words, folks just like you. We do in this book write about two or three great groups here in Wisconsin, including this one right here, Organic Valley, the great pioneering leaders of farmers coming together to create what they call the uncorporation, to incorporate values that are beyond the bottom line. Yes, they want to make a profit. That is one of their main values, but they also want to have fairness and justice and equal opportunity for all, including their workers, including their customers, including the communities in which they operate. We write about the the Union Cab Cooperative over in Madison, a group of scrappy cab drivers who were being treated with all the respect of a Kleenex by the owner of this company several years ago, and got together and first unionized, and then secondly took over the company themselves, and have forged a remarkable worker-owned little d democratic organization over there that allows cab drivers to have a middle-class life. And we write, of course, about this great group right here, the Fighting Bob Fest, now to be held in September the 6th over here in Baraboo. And I will be there, as will many other outsiders, but more importantly are you insiders who come together. And Ed's figured out a way to put the party back in politics. We could use a little of that, couldn't we? It's a fun engagement. If you haven't been over there, please join that. Those who say that you cannot escape the corporate tentacles, and that's what we're told from grammar school onward, basically, your role is to basically be a worker, be a consumer. Well, we're a bigger people than that. Yet they say, well, you can't break loose. A friend of mine, John Dromgoole, who's a pioneer down in Texas in the organic movement, he says, those who say it can't be done should not interrupt those who are doing it. And that's good folks like you. And I'm just so proud to be associated with you. And now you who are taking on the CAFO giants. You are showing the guts and the gumption to pioneer and to challenge the conventional wisdom, to confront the corporate order, to crash the bureaucratic barriers. And I know that this is not an easy thing to do. Woodrow Wilson once said, if you want to make enemies, try to change something. Well, all you're trying to change is some 60-odd years of ignorance and arrogance, avarice that has brought us an industrialized, conglomeratized, subsidized, and globalized food and agricultural system that is unsustainable. It's a system that runs roughshod over family farmers, runs roughshod over our soil and our water, over small business and rural communities, over food industry workers, over consumers, over food itself, over our people's values of fairness and justice and opportunity. The agribusiness powers get to thinking they're the top dogs, and we're just a bunch of fire hydrants out here in the countryside, you know. And that's what you're challenging, money and power. Again, that's not easy. You probably, some of y'all, and particularly in the isolated areas, get to feeling like that guy that B.B. King wrote about. Nobody likes you but your mama, and she might be jiving you too. You can get lonely out there. And that is why group meetings like this and coming together into organizations is so essential. Keep pushing. That's my message to you, because, first of all, you're winning. After all, anybody with an IQ above room temperature pretty well knows that the corporate ag boys, what they're doing ain't working for anybody but them. Yet they've seized control of national and state food policy. These are corporate lawyers and lobbyists, economists and bureaucrats, people who couldn't run a watermelon stand if we gave them the melons and had the highway patrol flag down the customers for them, yet they are in charge of food policy in our country. The operating principle of the ag biz powers, it seems to me, is that if brute force isn't working, you're probably not using enough of it, you know. And they just keep hammering. If dumping 8 billion pounds of pesticides a year is not doing enough damage to our food and our environment and our cells, well, let's add genetic engineering to the toxic stew, tamper with the very DNA of the world's food supply. And while we're at it, let's force grass-eating cows, nature's own vegetarians, to become carnivores and even cannibals. Let's put animals in CAFO cages, the concentration camps of agriculture. Let's inject animals with antibiotics and sex hormones. Let's zap the food supply with irradiation. Then let's clone everything so every cow and every tomato will have the same texture, taste, and composition. I mean, if ignorance is bliss, these people must be ecstatic, you know. They're turning food, nature's own, gloriously diverse and rich abundance, into a widget, an assembly line, internally manipulated corporate commodity that loses all connection to our good earth and to our well-being. There's a phrase in Latin that is worth remembering, cui bono. Who benefits? Cui bono. Well, all of this industrialization, globalization, not benefiting farm families, that's for sure. So what, say the powers that be? Farm families, well, it's sad to see them go, but after all, it's like an oldster whose time has come, so let them pass gently into the night. Well, bovine excrement, they're not passing gently into the night. They're being mugged. They're being murdered. It's a long-term, carefully plotted mugging. Beginning, well, you can go way back, but you can also go to our old buddy Earl Butz. Some years ago, Ag Secretary under Nixon, saying this trend toward less farms is not bad from a national point of view. It's good that we have been able to produce an increasing amount of food with the work of a smaller percentage of our population. This releases people to do something useful in our society. Wouldn't you like to buy him for what he's worth and sell him for what he thinks he's worth? I mean, there's a budget enriching program right there. Well, right on down the line. This attitude still is going on. The economists continue to say, well, the problem is we have too many farmers, you know. This is why John Kenneth Galbraith once said, if we laid all the economists end to end, it would be a good thing. My message to you is that you are on the right track. You are the answer. You are the future. What you're building in this one-day conference, what you will extend from here, will succeed. And it will be accepted by the people. It will be indeed applauded by the people if you keep it pushing and keep going. And so that's my message here for you today.